In this module, we are covering Chapter 1 in your textbook. And really, this module is just about giving us a framework for moving forward. So, it is an introduction that hopefully will help you as we get into each of the individual religions in future modules. So, we'll talk about some big questions like what is religion? What is the purpose of religion? And how do we best study religions? And so when we seek to find answers to those, then we're a little bit more prepared to take on one religion at a time, as we will in future modules. And I think what you'll find is the answers to these questions are actually a little bit harder to come to than you may initially think. So remember that reading your textbook, you need to make sure that you get to the textbook reading and then supplement your reading with these videos. I think that by doing this, you will get a fuller understanding of what we are covering, and I think it'll just kind of sink in a little bit more that way. So, the major topics in this chapter are approaching the study of world religions, talking about what religions do, dimensions of religions, which are basically just categories of religion, and then thinking about religion in the modern world, and finally, the academic approach to the study of religions. So, if you haven't already read the textbook, make sure you do that after you watch this lecture. So, first, thinking about religion from an academic perspective is actually a relatively new thing. Before the Enlightenment in the 18th century, people often didn't really think of religion as kind of its own entity or something to study in and of itself. But as a result of Europeans exploring distant lands and kind of coming face to face with religions they knew nothing about in these distant lands, religion became more and more a subject that people were studying. And it was the German philosopher Immanuel Kant that was most influential in recognizing religion as something worth studying in and of itself, rather than just studying a culture or something a lot more broad. Rather, it was Kant that wanted to get to just to religion, to study religion in and of itself as its own thing. So, as we start talking about various religions, one thing we need to get straight is the difference between religion and theology. Okay, so I think of theology as kind of, if you think of religion as kind of this umbrella, I would say theology fits below that umbrella. Theology is focused on learning the nature of the divine. It's asking questions like, who is God? What is God like? Whereas the definition of religion is larger, and but it can actually be kind of hard to define exactly what is and what isn't when it comes to religion. So, generally, I think of theology as more like the set of beliefs about God, whereas religion includes the practices and the institution and a lot more than just the mental, the belief aspect. So, there have been plenty of definitions put forward for what exactly religion is. Three 18th century scholars had some pretty prominent definitions that have stuck around for quite a while, and you can read each of those definitions in your textbook. So, Emile Durkheim, that was a French sociologist, and then William James, he was an American psychologist, and then finally, Paul Tillich, he was a Protestant theologian. So, all three of these in the 18th century put forward a pretty good definition of religion. But it seems that over time, this definition of what is and isn't religion is constantly being shaped to kind of fit within the cultures in which we live. So along those lines of this definition of religion kind of changing shape over time, there are two current definitions that are pretty widely accepted at this time. The HarperCollins Dictionary of Religion basically is focused around belief and practices that are relating to superhuman beings, that are relating to some sense of divine. There being something outside of just reality that we know it in this human world. So that's a very brief and concise definition of religion. Another very popular one, and maybe I think a little bit more helpful, is Bruce Lincoln's definition of religion. And he kind of divides it into four domains. And those are discourse, practices, community, and institution. And I'll just briefly hit on what each one of those mean, but I think you will see that those get a little bit closer to what you kind of know in your head as what religion is. Even though it may be difficult to put into words, I think that Lincoln really captures this a lot more clearly than some of these other examples. So the discourse is kind of going back to the theology, the set of beliefs, and the discourse transcends the human and the temporal and the contingent. So there's something about this discourse, something about these beliefs that's looking beyond to something higher, to something outside of humans. And then you come to the practices, and this would be the practices. The reason that the practices are done is to either produce a proper world or to produce a proper human as relating to the discourse. So basically, you have a set of beliefs that then govern actions. And so these practices are the actions that are done for a specific end. They are either making the world better or making the human better, or, better may not be the right word, but it's moving them towards the goal of this religion, whatever that may be. And then next is community. Members of a specific religion tend to construct an identity with reference to the discourse, the theology or the beliefs, and the practices. So not only is this a mental assent thing, it is also an action-oriented thing, and it's a community thing. This becomes a part of people's community. And then finally, it's an institution. So in some way, the discourse of the religion has to be regulated along with the practices and the community. And so over time, the religion can, take on its shape while the members recognize the eternal validity of it. So it may change shape a little bit depending on the culture, but the members still see it as true and valid and transcendental. So now we come to the big question of what religions do. What is their purpose or their function? And just as a solid definition of what religion is, this can be another hard question to answer. And so throughout your textbook, you'll find a few definitions thrown out of the function of religion. And you'll see here 3 of them are Emil Durkheim, Sigmund Freud, and Karl Marx. You can read all of these definitions in your textbook, but Durkheim, he is most focused on religion being for the purpose of community, that it unites people. Whereas I feel like Freud and Marx are maybe a little bit more negative in the sense that, I'll read a little bit of what Marx says. He says, "Man makes religion. Religion does not make man." In other words, religion is the self-consciousness and self-feeling of man who has either not yet found himself or has already lost himself again. So I'll stop there and you can read the rest of that quote in your textbook, but it tends to be a little bit more of a negative view that religion is for those who are lost or haven't found themselves yet. It's rather more about the self than it is about bringing people together, as Emil said. Not that any of these examples are specifically right or wrong, but these are some prominent examples from throughout history. So, when we think about religion and why we need it, humans often gravitate towards religion as a means of answering life's biggest questions. And each major religion has a different way of answering these questions. And so we'll really be exploring that later as we get into the different religions, as we see, what is their response to these questions. Questions like, what is ultimate reality? Is this life that we know all that there is? How should we live in this world? And what is our ultimate purpose? Are we here to make money and have a good time, or are we here to do good works, or a number of things? And so each religion that we're going to study looks at these questions and has answers for them. So, looking at ultimate reality, the question of, is this life that we know all that there is, or is there anything divine out there? And as you read this section in your textbook, you're going to come to a lot of definitions that relate to this question. So, if you are theistic, if a religion is theistic, it has a belief in some kind of God, some kind of divine, some kind of something beyond human. Whereas non-theistic believes that there's nothing divine, that this natural physical world is all there is. And then there's also the idea of a transtheistic religion, which is the idea that there are gods out there, but they're kind of on the fringe. They're not important in the sense that, they can save you or they can enlighten you. So then there are also different ways of categorizing theism. So you have kind of this, it's a breaking down of sorts that, some religions are theistic, some are non theistic, and if you're theistic, you can continue to break that down a little bit further. So the definitions continue. Polytheism is the belief in many gods, where monotheism is the belief in one God. So you can think like Judaism and Christianity are monotheistic religions. Henotheism is many gods, the belief in many gods, but one special God that's elevated above the others. And then finally, pantheism is the belief that all of nature and all of the material world is divine. So rather than thinking that the God or the God figure or the divine is something out there, it's rather that the divine is all around us. So then a couple of more options when we think about ultimate reality in terms of religion. Atheism is the belief that denies any existence of anything divine. And then monism is the idea that all reality is ultimately one. So, sort of relating back to the pantheism, where for the pantheism, the belief is that everything is divine. Monism is that there's just no distinction between what's divine and what's reality. It's just that things are that just things exist. So then an important thing about religion and the origin of religions is, how are they revealed? What is the revelation to humans? A common way of revelation is through sacred text or scriptures. So you could think about the Bible or the Quran. And then another thing that's important about ultimate reality is cosmology. And this is just that religion has things to say not just about what's divine, but also about the natural world, such as, where did this world come from, and what is the status of our planet and the universe, and how is the universe ordered. And so religion isn't just about what's out there, what's not like us. It's also about our world and how does our world work and how do we fit into the big picture. So all of this fits into what religions do. What is a religion's function? So then, thinking about the dimensions of religion, I don't really like the word dimensions. I think it's more helpful to think about different categories within a specific religion. So, throughout history, there have been people that have, wanted to divide religions into, or divide ways of thinking about religions into different categories. And so Ninian Smart determined 7 dimensions, and those are mythic, doctrinal, ethical, ritual, experiential, social, and material. So this just goes back to the thinking in terms of dimensions or categories makes it easier when you are comparing one religion to the next because you can see a little bit easier how they're unique from each other. So one way that I personally categorize religions I'm thinking about is the difference in orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Um, the orthodoxy would be the beliefs that a religion has. What does the religion believe about God or not believe in God? And then the orthopraxy, what are the practices of the religion? What is the natural outflowing as a result of the belief? Usually, the belief is going to guide the actions. But I think sometimes it can be a little bit helpful to divide it into further categories. So, the textbook takes the stance of dividing each religion into 3 categories, and that is the teachings, which kind of encompasses the beliefs, the doctrines, the myths, the stories that go along with a religion. And then next, the historical development. So, where did this religion come from and how has it developed over time? And then finally, the way of life. So, getting to that orthopraxy aspect where you get into, what are the practices of the religion and what are the modes of experience. And so you'll see throughout the textbook, as we focus on each individual religion, that each of these 3 categories are touched on, and we'll look at how the religions differ in terms of how each of these categories are played out. So, then thinking about religions in the modern world. As we study religion, we need to keep our current culture, the world we currently live in our mind. The way that we think of religion today is different from how it was thought about even just 50 years ago. And so, because of this, as we're reading, the textbook considers 4 characteristics about today's world that play into how we think about religion. And those are modernization, urbanization, globalization, and multiculturalism. So I will just quickly go through these definitions, and you can refer back to your textbook if you need to go back and look at those again. So, modernization is the process through which societies transform, whether that be economically, socially, and culturally, all to just keep up with the competitive global marketplace. So, basically, just the culture and the way that we do things is always evolving as time goes on. The next one is urbanization, which is just the fact that populations are moving away from rural areas and more to urban areas. So cities are becoming more and more populated. And then globalization is the linking and intermixing of cultures. You can see this has especially happened since we're improving so much with technology in ways in the past that if you lived in southeastern Oklahoma and you were only exposed to the ways of life, the culture of southeast Oklahoma, you had no idea what things were like, what was going on, what people did in, say New York City or say London but with the help of technology, we now can know a whole lot about other people groups and other locations in an instant just by, pulling out our phone and doing some Googling. So that's the idea of globalization. And then we also have the idea of multiculturalism, which is the coexistence of different peoples and their cultural ways in one time and place. So, southeastern Oklahoma isn't much of a mixing pot when it comes to, different cultures. We have a few, but definitely not compared to somewhere like New York City or some other major cities where there are lots and lots of different cultures all in one place. But that plays into religion in the modern world. And then finally, the textbook gives two examples of how things are changing in the modern world relating to religion, specifically within the last few decades. The first is the changing roles of women. And there's been a recent increase in visibility and prominence of women in religion. So you can think of what in the past may have been kind of a man's role, or maybe even more of a patriarch religion. It's becoming more and more common that the woman takes a bigger part in religion. Just an easy example of women being ordained as pastors in the Christian tradition. But there are lots of examples across all major religions where women are just, their roles are changing in terms of how they do religion. And then the second one is the encounter of religion and science. So this is just the big question of, can science and religion work together? Or do they have to oppose one another? Do you have to choose either science or religion, or can it be both? And so this is a major hot topic right now, I think, especially in the last few years, for sure. And then finally, an academic approach to the study of religion. So, what are some things we need to keep in mind as we study these religions? We want to look at some general concepts to keep these in mind, specifically because we're coming at this from an academic's perspective. So, first of all, balance. We want to have a healthy balance between the insider and outsider perspectives. So, an insider is a person who takes part in a certain religion, while an outsider is one who is studying the religion from the outside and does not adhere to that religion. So, for me personally, I am an insider of the Christian tradition, while I am an outsider of, say, the Islam tradition. And so, both of these positions or perspectives come with, of course, different points of view. And so we keep that in mind as we converse with one another and as we learn about these religions, because we can see that both sides, being both the insider and the outsider, can lead to bias of sorts. And that's okay, that's normal, but we need to be aware of that and then think and act accordingly. Second is empathy. So we want to be able to see things from another person's perspective. So it's okay that I know that I'm part of the Christian tradition, and it's okay that you know that you are a part of whatever religious tradition. But as we're learning, we want to get outside of ourselves and outside of our own biases in order to just see what would things be like from another person's perspective. And this isn't a way of trying to change our own thinking about our own set of beliefs. It's just a way of trying to learn more about what we're studying, to learn more of various other people's perspectives. Second is comparative. So, in order to understand specific things about a religion, it's really helpful to study other religions. So, when you study world religions, it's helpful to study not just one, but many of them. And I say that, by this I don't mean that you have to study multiple religions in order for one of them to be true. I'm not saying that. Rather, you begin to understand your own religion better when you see how it's different from others. Or you begin to see that you are non-religious when you see what the religions have to offer. So whatever standpoint you're at, when you have an understanding of the religions that are out there, then you can make a reasonable determination of what it is you believe and why, which in my opinion is always very important, that you not only adhere to a religion if you choose to, but that you also know why that you do, and have reasons to back up why you believe that religion to be true. And then finally, multidisciplinary. And this is just the idea that as we're studying religions, we're looking at many different subjects. We're looking at anthropology, history, sociology, psychology, philosophy, theology, and many other fields of study. So, what we're doing here in studying religion is pretty fun because we are kind of looking into all of these different subjects to learn a little bit more about each of these religions. So, with all of this in mind, as we close the chapter, we can now begin to approach one religion at a time, looking at kind of these various categories and how they're distinct from one another.